All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us today. Thank you so much for taking a time to be part of the launch of the Rural Electric Co-ops webinar series here in Florida. We are very excited to have you here with us. So far, we're at 28. We do expect more to trickle in as the presentation goes on. My name is Sarah Gledhill. I'm the Florida Field Campaigner for the Center of Biological Diversity's Ignite Change program. If you haven't heard about Ignite Change, we are the national grassroots organizing arm of the center. So we work to build political power in communities across the nation to protect wildlife, wildlands, and people. So here we are, we're here today to talk about how we can organize against the greatest threat that we have ever faced, and that's climate change. And we need to be eliminating greenhouse pollution and speeding the transition to 100% clean, renewable energy. And here we are in Florida, sunny Florida. We can play a huge part of the equation with just that by using solar energy. So we believe that this is the future, and we want to see if you think so too, and if you will be part of this movement to bring more solar into Florida. We are super excited about this campaign and hope that you will be just as excited afterwards with this intro launch. We hope your interest will be piqued, and when you learn that how you can play a critical role in the democratic process of a rural electric co-op. So a couple of quick housekeeping mentions. This is recorded so that we can share it on YouTube with those who are not able to attend with us this evening. Everyone is automatically muted. We ask that you stay muted so that you can cut out on that background noise that can interfere with the presentations. We also have a chat box that I see some of you are already taking advantage of. Please introduce yourself, say who you are, where you're calling in from, why you decided to join the webinar this evening. We also have a Q&A box. If we have a smaller group, we can do questions in the chat, but because we expect a larger group this evening, we do have a Q&A box that has been set up. If you have questions, please post them there, and Shiva will be going through them and making sure that they're addressed and answered for you appropriately. And for all the folks on the phone, there's a couple of you. I'm sorry you can't take advantage of those options for you tonight, but perhaps maybe on the next presentation. So here is the quick intro to the speakers that we're going to be hearing from this evening. Shiva Patel. Shiva Patel co-leads the Population and Sustainability Program's renewable energy work with a focus on distributed community solar. Before joining the center, he worked on advocating, designing, and building an equitable, inclusive, community-owned solar program for low-income residents and communities of color in Alameda County, California, and more generally is interested in organizing a just transition to a non-extractive, regenerative economy. Liz Veazey is Network Director at We Own It, a national network for cooperative member owner rights, education, and organizing with a focus on rural electric cooperatives. Liz is a member of REAMP, R-E-A-M-P, Network Steering Committee, Power Shift Network Board, and Mode Shift Omaha Board. She lives in Omaha, Nebraska, where she's an active customer owner of Omaha Public Power District. Eric Kattelstad is the Energy Democracy Organizer at CURE, a rural grassroots organization firmly rooted in the communities of Western Minnesota. Eric is a lifelong resident of rural Western Minnesota and has been organizing for rural economic, social, and environmental justice for almost a decade. Based in New London, Minnesota, he's on the city council and works on a variety of different rural organizing projects, including Minnesota Farmers Union, the New London Food Cooperative, and the Rural Working Group of the Democratic Socialists of America. And last but not least, we have a nice successful reform story that we'd like to share, and that will be presented by Patrick Cox. He has made contributions in two areas of importance to Texas, its history and its environment. A leader in our state's historical community, Patrick continues to break new ground with his scholarship on Texas political history. And Like some of the politicians he studies, his interest in the environment has led him to fight against outdated power structures in the quest for clean air, water, and affordable energy for Central Texans. So here we are from Florida, getting these powerhouses from other states to help us launch this campaign in Florida. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Shiva.
Thank you, Sarah. And you can go to the next slide. Thanks. So thank you everyone for joining, both the attendees and the speakers. Like Sarah said, we have a wealth of knowledge and experience with us today, and hoping we can share that around. So just a quick note on sort of the context of this webinar series. So a little bit just on sort of the background. As you will find out on this webinar, rural electric cooperatives are a unique and often missed opportunity within the broader set of strategies and solutions that can bring about a just transition to clean renewable energy. While some rural electric cooperatives are leading the way with integrating renewable energy into their energy supply through innovative energy efficiency and community solar programs, many co-ops fall far short. But regardless of their past positions and actions, all rural electric co-ops have the potential to be more representative, more accountable, while leading the path forward. So the Center for Biological Diversity, as well as our organizing arm, Ignite Change, has partnered with the We Own It Network and the NAACP Florida chapter to launch this webinar series to help individuals better understand how electric co-ops work, as well as how to get involved to bring equitable and wildlife-friendly solar energy to their communities. Couple of goals that we're really trying to get out of this, by engaging in this webinar series, we hope you will learn the basics of rural electric co-ops, connect with others to advocate for equitable solar energy, as well as get inspired for the fight ahead. And so in the follow-up to this webinar, and we'll talk more about this later, but I just want to give folks a heads up, we will have a second webinar that will focus on specific member engagement strategies while also highlighting some case studies from across the country. So we're going to get a sneak peek from Patrick on a specific case study, and on our follow-up webinar, we're going to go much deeper into a few others as well. And our third webinar in this series will focus on specific campaign and advocacy opportunities in the Florida rural electric co-op context. So we're starting here today with an introduction, and on our following webinars, we're going to get more and more specific. And so with that, Sarah, do you mind moving to the next slide? So the agenda for today, just briefly, we're going to start off with a little history of rural electric co-ops from Eric. We'll then move into some rural electric co-ops 101, some basic information around rural electric co-ops from Liz. Then we'll hear from Patrick around a particular co-op reform story and his involvement there. And then we'll have a good amount of time for questions. And as Sarah noted, there is a specific Q&A box that's separate from the chat box that we ask that you record your questions there throughout the webinar, and I'll be keeping an eye on that so we can answer them towards the end. And then lastly, we'll close off just with a couple quick next steps, and I'll touch again on our follow-up webinars. All right, so to dive in, let's start off with just a quick poll question. So Sarah will help us get this poll question set up, and you should see that on your screen shortly. So our question here is, have you been involved with a rural electric co-op? And some examples of being involved, you may be a member and you might have voted, you might have attended an annual meeting, you may have attended board meetings, or you could have just made some requests around more information about your rural electric co-op, such as asking for bylaws or other information. So let's just take, folks to take a quick minute just to answer this question. And Sarah, can you see the number of folks who have answered so we get a good sense of when we can move on?
With 46% have voted.
Okay, so let's just give you another 20 seconds to give an answer to this question.
We just bumped it up to 50%. So come on, everybody.
All right, I think that's should be enough time. Hopefully everyone has voted. If you haven't, please do. Okay. So we have the answers there. We have about 79% of folks who have not been involved. So that leaves 21% who have been involved, which is, pretty good actually. As this being an intro webinar, we have a lot of folks who are new to rural electric co-ops, as well as some folks who have been involved before. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Eric, who's going to speak a little bit about the history of rural electric co-ops.
Alrighty, hey everyone. In the 1920s, about 90% nationally of rural electric co-op or rural communities did not have access to electricity at all. So this was a result of a variety of different factors. One of which being that your investor-owned utilities, your traditional utilities, thought that it was not cost-effective, it was too expensive, and the profit margin wasn't high enough to expand their electric service out of the cities and into rural communities and to farms. There's also some there's also some history that kind of indicates that some of the considerations being made by these utility companies were that rural people and farmers were too stupid, too poor to understand what to do with electricity. In most cases, this didn't happen. Although there are a few cases around the country of farmers and rural people coming together to create their own electric co-ops before the New Deal, which I'll tell you a little bit about in a moment. But actually, one of the first electric co-ops in the country was formed less than 10 miles from where I'm sitting currently. It was a group of farmers who created the Stony Run Creek electric co-op almost 30 years before the New Deal created the funding available to create the modern electric co-op system. As I've already indicated, the rural electrification and the creation of electric co-ops was a New Deal program. So the Roosevelt administration, seeing kind of the broad consequences of the Dust Bowl, really viewed electrification of rural places as economic development opportunity and as a way to improve the lives of rural communities across the country, as well as continue that economic recovery that was so necessary during the Great Depression. So the Rural Electrification Act was passed in 1936, and this created a series of low-interest federal loans to local cooperatives to help rural communities and farmers expand electric access and distribution to their communities. As Liz will go into detail a little bit later, these organizations were democratically owned and democratically governed, which is part of the wonderful and sometimes difficult part of dealing with electric co-ops. since rural electrification. So in the 1970s, we're going to jump ahead a little bit to kind of the next big stage in electric co-op development, right? So you have kicked off by the New Deal, the development of electric co-ops that distribute power to rural places. But in the 1970s, we saw a buildup of electric cooperative generation. And so what cooperatives did during the 1970s was they took advantage of these same loan programs from the federal government and banded together to create co-ops of co-ops to generate their own electricity. So we call these generation and transmission co-ops, or G&Ts is the kind of wonky term you'll heard used by people talking about electric co-ops on a frequent basis. So G&Ts are the folks, or are the organizations who are generating quite a bit of the electricity that is distributed by our local co-ops across the country. And from the get-go, a lot of the loans that were made out to the generation and transmission co-ops were for very sizable coal generation plants. In one case, in the 1970s, an electric co-op or a generation and transmission co-op that serves Minnesota and the Dakotas and a variety of, or a few other states in the Midwest and West, Basin Electric, used almost the entire annual budget for this program and put in building out a coal plant. So the investment in these coal plants was really massive. And that's part of the difficulty and part of the reasons that we're still dealing with the over-reliance on coal in the electric co-op world today. It's a result of the difficulty in being able to affordably distribute and generate electricity to rural places. So these big investments were made, and many co-ops are having a lot of problems dealing with the debt service on these big co-ops. So could I have the next slide, please? So as you can see, electric co-ops are still incredibly reliant on coal for the reasons I've just gone over, and this is despite all of the information that I think we all are well aware of at this point, of wind and solar being quite a bit cheaper than coal and natural gas. So we're really not seeing the transition towards clean energy that we need to see based on these historical drivers. And there are a variety of different reasons why the history of co-ops play into the current situation of reliance on coal. One of which being this kind of pro-coal and pro-fossil fuel dogma that many co-ops have developed. But another part of it is the anti-democratic nature that they've developed. And, like many other New Deal programs, co-ops have been particularly susceptible to institutional racism. So, while these loans were made available to rural communities, a lot of these efforts were exclusive of Black communities, brown communities, and indigenous communities. And those problems persist today. So that's a little bit about the history of electric co-ops and how it's driving the current problems in democracy and problems in carbon intensity today. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Eric. So this is Liz with We Own It. And yeah, you all can see the map of the more than 800 distribution co-ops. So those are the like little small outlined things on the maps. And there's more than 800 across the US. And then the clumps of yellow, purple, blue, orange are the generation and transmission co-ops that are made up of the smaller distribution co-ops. So you can see Seminole in Florida in yellow. You can see TVA is one in orange. And there's a bunch of those. So there's about 60 of those larger generation transmission co-ops. And yeah, so together there are more than 900 electric co-ops that cover around 56% of the US landmass and serve 42 million Americans. Yeah, I think we can go to the next slide. And here's some more stats. Eric mentioned already some about where the power comes from, about 2/3 from fossil fuels. They have around 45 billion in revenue together every year. So that's a lot of money that potentially could be better invested in local renewable energy efficiency opportunities and really help increase local economies, local jobs. Electric co-ops serve 93% of the persistent poverty counties, so there's a big opportunity for that. Okay, I think next slide. And then since a number of folks are from Florida, I thought we'd zoom in and look at the Florida electric co-op map, and I will stick a link in the chat if people want to have access to that. But yeah, I mean, they cover a pretty large chunk of Florida. And then you can go to the next slide. And then these are the ones that are part of that generation and transmission co-op that's in Florida, Seminole. So I just wanted to show that too. Cool. And then this is a question we get often around like, what is an electric co-op? How is it different from other electric service providers? So just thought I would touch on that. So you can see again, I've got the map of the electric co-ops, and they are monopolies providing electricity to their customers. You could also call them member owners since it's a cooperative in that territory. And so some other places are served by investor-owned utilities like Florida Power and Light, I guess, in Florida, or Duke Energy, or, you know, there's a number of other investor-owned utilities. And then some places have municipal or public power providers. I think a number of of the large cities in Florida have municipal electric utilities. But yeah, hopefully that sort of helps differentiate. So if you live in the territory of the electric co-op, you should be served by the electric co-op. Although some of those territories, you know, they look like a square or a circle. A lot of them, you know, the investor-owned utilities will come in and take out the little small cities or large users. So sometimes it's somewhat fractured, but generally you can look at the map and sort of get a sense of that. Thanks. And then this is another question about, and I know we've got at least one person with Solar United Neighbors. I think they do really amazing work across the country, but differentiating electric co-ops from solar buying co-ops. So, you know, we just talked about rural electric co-ops. So they serve, and I include a little map here, so they serve a specific territory. And And then solar buying co-ops are just generally people who come together and say, we all want to put solar on our homes. Let's come together and get a better deal and lower our costs for our solar panels if we all buy them together. And I think generally those people could be within the same electric utility, and that probably makes things easier and everyone gets like the same financial situation, but you could have people from different places. So again, the like solar co-ops that Solar United Neighbors is organizing are to help people buy solar to put on their roof. And then the rural electric co-ops is the electric utility providing the power in the territory, in their territory. So hopefully that helps clear that up. And yeah, I wanted to talk a little since electric co-ops are, different than the investor-owned utilities. Investor-owned utilities, have a commitment to generate profit for their shareholders, but electric co-ops are owned by their member owners and committed to serving their members, and they also have a commitment to 7 cooperative principles that all cooperatives around the world are committed to. And so I've included those here for folks, and I guess we have a couple on the phone, so I'll read them out to make sure everybody gets a sense of them. Open and voluntary membership. I guess that one actually, like, if you live in electric co-op territory and you want electric power, you have to be a member to access the power, but you could choose not to get electricity, I guess. Democratic member control is number 2. Members' economic participation, number 3. Number 4, autonomy and independence. Number 5, education, training, and information. Number 6, cooperation among cooperatives. So that generally means like the electric co-op might, bank with a cooperative bank, and maybe they'll buy certain supplies from another cooperative. So cooperation among cooperatives, and then 7 is concern for community. So just wanted to help ground us in some of those principles, and then also I included a slide on the cooperative values that are also set by the sort of International Cooperative Alliance, and that I think all co-ops are committed to. Just sort of help ground us in these. So the cooperative values are self-help, self-responsibility, democracy, equality, equity, and solidarity. And then cooperative members believe in ethical values of honesty, openness, social responsibility, and caring for others. And so the co-ops, a lot of them, or some of them, have the cooperative principles on their website. I haven't seen the cooperative values, but those are sort of foundational things that might be useful in work with co-ops, and to think about what co-ops have sort of committed to. And I think sometimes co-ops say, oh, our members don't understand that. That seems like a great opportunity to work with the co-op to do member education about energy efficiency or renewable energy or broadband, or whatever it may be. So yeah, wanted to sort of ground us in those. And then wanted to talk a little bit about rural electric co-op structure. And most co-ops generally have a board of directors. I think that they range in the number from smaller ones, maybe around 6 or 7, up to 9 or 12. But those are, or should be, elected by the member owners. Usually they're staggered so that, some people are elected every year, and so they don't all turn over at the same time. But that board of directors is usually one that sort of is elected by the member owners and sets the strategy and direction and, makes major decisions for the co-op. I will say that there are some co-ops that may not have an election, or they may say, oh, we don't have enough members to have quorum, so we're just going to have to reappoint ourselves. But most co-ops do actually have an annual election, and many co-ops allow people to vote by mail. Some co-ops only allow people to vote in person at like an annual meeting, but it varies from co-op to co-op. And then the bylaws generally outlines voting, who can qualify to be a director, how that process works, if there's a nominations committee, or how you could petition to run for the board of directors, and other sort of important information about how the co-op works. The co-op should make available any of that information about the bylaws to the members. Some co-ops have it on their website, some don't. Capital credits are something that co-ops, because they're nonprofits, they're technically 501c12 nonprofits. Because they're nonprofits, if they generate, additional funds, they're supposed to return that to their members as capital credits. Some co-ops do that annually. Some co-ops don't. But that is something that some members have organized around and pushed back against the co-op to try to get those. And there's we could have a whole webinar just about that. It can get really complicated, but I'll stop there for now about the capital credits. And then I was just going to mention that I think most states, like 38 states with electric co-ops, have like a state association where the co-ops sort of come together and they have conferences, trainings, publications. They often lobby together. And then there's also a national Rural Electric Cooperative Association, or NRECA, and so I put their logo there. And then I think I have one more slide, and then I'm going to turn it over to Patrick. And I mentioned voting, but I was just going to show this from a report that the Institute for Local Self-Reliance did. I think Marie Donahue from ILSR is on here, but this was a good image showing that like most co-ops have less than 10% average turnout. So I think that also shows huge opportunity for folks to organize and make change and elect new people to your board or get involved in the co-op. So I want to turn it over to Patrick, who actually was elected at one of the largest rural electric co-ops in Texas.
Okay, thank you, Liz. And I am Patrick Cox. Am I coming through okay from the beautiful Texas Hill Country in Central Texas? And I'll give you all a couple of minutes, a little on the background of the Pedernales Electric Cooperative, because it's important in a number of ways because of what happened in fairly recent history, but also what has taken place over many decades. PEC, to make it short, PEC, it's the nation's largest cooperative, both in members, which is over 300,000 now. The miles of line is over 8,000. It is extremely very large service area, which is both urban, suburban, and rural. So it's unique, but although I think because of Florida, the situation that's happened there, Florida is a fast-growing state like Texas. What we once addressed as rural cooperatives have really changed to a large degree. The PEC also, because it's the largest, We have over $500 million a year in revenues. It's a billion-dollar corporation. Now, the large co-ops in Florida won't be as large, both in members and in their capital, as well as their other financial aspects. But nevertheless, I think there's going to be a lot of key similarities for looking at how these co-ops in this particular area of the United States and in other places, of looking at case studies like PEC to see how you can literally transform both from a governance, from a financial side, from a social responsibility side, and importantly, as we've all talked about, for the renewable energy transformation that needs to take place. Real quickly, I had been involved, going back many years, in working on reforms at the PEC. And anybody can go look this up because it's got a long record and a long history of what started out as one of the model cooperatives from the Depression era, from 1938 up until the 70s. A group of people got control of the cooperative in the 70s and maintained control of the co-op all the way until the early 2000s. I didn't come on the board until 2008, when it was the first time we actually had fair elections. We had, and I'm just going to give you a couple examples, but these were the things we had to address. The board members were there for decades. The board president, who I replaced, was there for 40 years. The general manager of the cooperative had been there not quite as long, but between the board, the general manager, and a number of professional services and organizations, it was an extremely tightly controlled organization, which, because in our part of the world, the co-ops utilities are very valuable entities, have large payrolls, have a lot of money that they contract for services out in the community. And also because of it, in areas like this that are expanding, there are a lot of things involving real estate, insurance, and other business transactions. If you actually have it controlled by a very small group, which is what happened at PEC, it can lead to some very, let's just call them non-cooperative style of governance and finance. Because of the many misdeeds that went on. And again, this took place for many, many years because of a combination of things in the early 2000s. It was the member pressure. We finally convinced a number of elected officials around the state to begin looking into the transgressions that were taking place at PEC. We enlisted the media to come in as well to start examining and publicizing some of the things. And then finally, a group of members got together and filed a class action lawsuit. The end result, and if we get into the Q&A, I can tell you specifically about some of the reforms in the major areas that we addressed. The end result was we had fair and democratic elections for the first time in many decades in 2008 when I was elected. We instituted a number of necessary financial reforms to help. Basically, we had to clean up the cooperative and improve its credit rating and its standing. We also finally had the open meetings and the open governance. We had codes of ethics for board members, and we also began instituting, both on the rate side and on our renewable energy side, to develop a more diversified portfolio, beginning with a renewable and efficiency energy policy that we put into place the first year that I was elected. So it took a lot of work, a lot of effort. Many people were involved. I served for 8 years on the board. I ended up being the board president for several years in my final term. And there's a lot of ironies in life, and I'm a fan of irony. But starting out many decades ago as a young and very uncertain critic to emerge to become a board member and president of not only the largest co-op, a billion-dollar corporation, and it's now a model cooperative, both for governance, both for renewable energy, but for participation of its members. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm looking forward to hearing from everybody with questions.
All right. Thank you so much, Patrick. And thank you as well, Eric. And we will jump into the questions just shortly. But before we do that, we have our second and last poll question. So Sarah's going to help us get that up on the screen. And there you go. You should see that. So folks should just take a minute to answer this question, which is on a scale from 1 to 5. How useful has this information today been? And if you would also like to expand beyond just putting a number there, feel free to make any suggestions for future versions of this webinar, as well as follow-up webinars in the chat box. So I'm going to give folks just maybe another 30 seconds, and then we'll have the rest of time for Q&A. All right, Sarah, we have a decent response rate?
Yes, we're at 50%, same as last time.
All right, we'll take it. All right, so there we see a lot of 4s and a couple of 3s and 5s. Thank you for your responses. And again, if you have any suggestions, go ahead and put those in the chat box. So next slide, please, Sarah. So just before we do go into the open Q&A section, and I will just mention there is a Q&A box option basically at the bottom center of your screen where you can submit questions. I've noticed a couple folks have put questions in the chat, which is also fine. I'll go ahead and read those in a minute. But if you could get those submitted in the Q&A, that would be great. And so before we do that, I'm just going to take a moment to go over a couple questions that may be on your mind, maybe come up. And for us, these are sort of common questions that come up in sort of an introductory setting. So I'm going to put this first question to Liz, which is, how do I know if I'm a member of a rural electric co-op?
Cool, yeah, that is a good question. So I think you could look at your electric bill if you pay your electric bill, and if it says electric co-op, or sometimes in the South they say EMC, Electric Membership Corporation. So some of you may be members of EMCs, which is the same thing as electric co-op. Some of them don't have electric co-op or EMC in the name, so you would just need to look on their website or look at a map of the co-ops in your state. And I can put a link in the chat for some state maps for people to check out. You could also reach out to me or talk to whoever pays your electric bill and try to figure out who your electric utility is. But I'll put my email in the chat and put a link to some maps if that is helpful for folks.
Great, thank you, Liz. Our second question here is for Eric, and that's, how are rural electric co-ops regulated?
So the phrase that we use a lot in this work is, you've met one co-op, you've met one co-op, meaning that every co-op is different, and every co-op in every state is a little different as well. So in some states, like in Minnesota, for instance, co-ops are entirely unregulated by our Public Utilities Commission. So, for instance, the boards of directors act as the utility commission for each local cooperative, which is something that was recently passed again, and we did a little bit of legislative work on. There is one co-op in Minnesota, however, that is voluntarily regulated by our utilities commission. It works really different in other states. Some co-op or some states have regulatory policy that works similar to Minnesota. Others are more tightly regulated. However, the generation and transmission co-ops do have a little bit more stringent regulation on them, just because of their size. In Minnesota, for instance, they are regulated by our utilities commission as well. Other kind of regulatory bodies that might have some oversight over co-ops is the Rural Utility Service as part of the USDA, and FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So, it's kind of it's a tough question to answer, but so I'm not certain of the specific context in Florida, but I imagine there's someone on this call who could tell you that.
Great. Thank you, Eric. I see a bunch of questions coming in. Thanks, folks. Keep on submitting those, and I'll get to those in just a second. And so, Patrick, if you're still there, we have a question for you, which I think you touched upon a little bit in your presentation. If I'm a rural electric co-op customer, how can I engage with my co-op beyond just paying my electricity bill?
Yeah, great question. And again, this is going to vary by co-op depending on their policy towards, openness and transparency and what they're encouraging members to do. But that being said, let me just throw out a few things and we can talk about these more if people like. First of all, check to see if your cooperative has member committees. There are co-ops that do everything from having members serve on nominations. There will be people that will be doing donations. If your co-op's doing a rate study, if you're a business person and they have a business advisory group, there are a lot of different things to look at in that regard. The second thing is on knowing the people at the co-op. Find out who your directors are. Find out who your local managers are and your employees. I mean, I always have suggested you get what people today call retail politics, but it's just knowing people one-on-one. And again, remember, in this rural electric cooperative background, there's a culture of one-on-one relationships, whether it be personal or business. A couple of other things to ask about, and you can do a lot of research just going online and look at your co-op, but find out what is their policy regarding renewable energy. What is their policy for allowing people to put their own solar system either individually or as a group? What are the efficiency policies? Are there efficiency audits that the co-op offers? Are there rebates or discounts that are offered by the co-op for energy efficient lighting and appliances, both on the residential side as well as the business side? And then also, and just one other thing, going back to the election process and the procedures, go and see what your co-op does. How easy do they make it for people to participate in the elections, and do they encourage it? For example, how long do people have to vote? How long does a member have to vote in an election? Can you do it by mail? Can you do it in person? Or can you do it online? PEC, when we changed election rules, you can do all three. That's part of the openness and the transparency. And the last thing, just let me mention real quick, because I touched on it earlier, find out if your board members and your cooperative, do they have a conflict of interest policy? Do they have a statement of ethical conduct for the cooperative, for the employees, and the managers and the board members? These are all part of the good governance elements that really will tell you and give you a good sign about how open and how much electric co-ops are going to be trying to work with their members at all levels and in all areas of the cooperative. So I hope that helps. A few ideas.
Fantastic. Thank you, Patrick. And just make a note that we have about 5 minutes left. So I'm going to pick a couple questions that I think we can get answered in that time. And if we do, please still feel free to submit any other questions. And those that have been submitted and don't get answered in the next 5 minutes, we'll be sure to follow up with you, as well as I'll just make a note that a lot of these questions they're fantastic and are things that we will be diving deeper into on our next webinar. And so a lot of those will be answered there as well. So just the two questions that I would like for us to answer here. I think the first question is for Eric. Can you please review just briefly how institutional racism has played in the history of co-ops? If you could take a few minutes for that. And then Patrick, if you could just share a little bit more about, the solar and renewable energy plans or policies that were, that happened at your co-op, just maybe give an outline of that and maybe share some, a resource that others can look into. So Eric, do you want to go ahead and take that first question?
Yeah, I think Liz might actually have some better connection to a couple of really current stories from across the Southeast that are happening. So maybe I'd pass that to her, but yeah.
Okay, yeah, I can take it if you want. I know we're running out of time. I think Eric sort of touched on this some, but the people who started electric co-ops and who got the funding from the federal government were generally white male landowners. And so there's a lot of people who are left out initially, who weren't part of that. And then, in a lot of these co-ops, those people and then their sons and their families, are the ones who've stayed in charge of the co-op. And those good old boys clubs have, continued in a lot of places. So a lot of people have been locked out of the benefits of the co-op for a long time. And I think it's really upsetting, especially in places in the South with more than 50% people of color in the co-op territories where they may have no people of color working at the co-op or on the board. So I think there's huge opportunities to democratize and bring, help the co-ops better serve entire communities.
Oh, great, thank you, Liz. And Patrick, do you mind actually, is there a link that you could share that maybe goes into a bit more detail about sort of the renewable energy policy and plans for your co-op that folks?
Yeah, our policies for PEC are laid out very clearly. And if you just go to the Pedernales Electric Co-op site and then look for the policies regarding solar energy and renewables, energy audits, energy efficiency, everything is laid out very clearly on the website. And I think just real quickly, one of the questions was when we first came on the board, how did you get this implemented? One of the first things, and I ran back when I ran for election back in 2008, one of the things I ran on, besides the reforms in governance and on the financial side, was to develop a renewable energy and efficiency policy. First thing we did was we put together a poll for the members. We asked them questions to see what their perspectives were on that. We put together a member advisory committee that I chaired. We wrote the policy. We put it out, posted it for public comment, and we made changes, and we adopted it within the first year in a totally open, participatory process that we had people from all throughout the co-op involved. That's the way processes should work.
Thank you, Patrick. And we have just one more minute. So Sarah, if you could go to that next step slide. Please be on the lookout for a follow-up email from us that will go out tomorrow, and there'll be more information about our next webinar in this series that will really continue the conversation and the questions that have come up in today's webinar, specifically focus on and how can members get involved, what are the different strategies, and what are some other stories from across the country that we can learn from and look to help build this movement in Florida specifically. So with that, we've come to 6 o'clock, and I just want to give a quick thank you to all of our speakers and the attendees. This will be recorded. This has been recorded, and there'll be a link to that as well in the follow-up email. And on this last slide, there's our emails here. Feel free to reach out to us there. And again, I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of the questions, but we will keep a track of them, and we will follow up. So thank you very much, everyone.